I am now going to tell you the story of that time when a massive Russian submarine loaded with nuclear weapons and vodka ran aground within the Swedish borders and almost sparked a full-scale war. If you're not from Europe, I doubt you ever heard of this chaotic event.
My name is Bargo, and welcome to my channel.
Let's get started. In autumn 1981, tension is high around the Baltic Sea. The Soviet Union is simultaneously conducting its largest exercise ever, called CO.AG. Over 100,000 men are participating, and enormous military resources are being displayed. More than 40 years ago, on the night of October the 28th, a Soviet submarine of the Whiskey class runs aground in the Blekinge archipelago off the coast of Karlskrona. Perhaps Captain Anatoly Mikhailovich Gushtin of the Soviet Baltic Fleet did not realize that a mark in the navigation line was missing until it was too late. The submarine U-137 had participated in the CO.AG exercise and returned to its home base in the Baltics. Orders were issued to sail out to the sea with a course set for Poland, to embark nuclear weapons and a commander. After that, they provisioned in East Germany and began patrolling an area east of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea. On October the 24th, the submarine received two signal messages. The instructions was for the ship's captain to retrieve a special package of secret documents from his safe. Subsequently, the submarine's participation in a larger operation against Sweden began. On October the 27th, in the evening, submarine confirms its position through a series of maneuvers around Utklippan, the brightest lighthouse in the Baltic Sea at that time. The vessel proceeded cautiously due to Swedish military exercises in the area at that time. Once the coast was clear, it surfaced and assumed a semi-submerged position, lit the lanterns and switched to diesel propulsion with one engine. It was a well-thought-out plan, making it easily mistaken for a fishing boat in the darkness. As the submarine U-137 sets course to approach the Blekinge archipelago, it enters the military fairway. Everything proceeds according to plan, until 7:57 p.m. when the submarine ran aground on Torumsjö. The 76-meter-long behemoth that ran aground is the Soviet submarine U-137. 6 weeks earlier, on September 16, the vessel departed from the Soviet Baltic Fleet base in Baltijsk, outside Kaliningrad. The commanding officer aboard is Captain Anatoly Gushtin, a young submarine captain in the Soviet submarine brigade with a spotless career behind him. The second highest ranking officer on board is the political officer Vasily Besedin. The 24-year-old submarine is somewhat of a technological relic, and here is some quick facts about the submarine. U-137 was a heap of scrap. The grounding of the submarine caught the Soviet Union off guard. The outdated submarine showed the world that the Soviets were operating with obsolete equipment. The Soviet submarine that ran aground in the Swedish archipelago belonged to the so-called Whiskey class, a conventional type of vessel armed with torpedoes. Technically, it was a development of a German submarine type from World War II, which was considered very advanced at that time. However, by the early 1980s, it was ready for the scrapyard. From 1951 to 1957, the Soviet Union built 215 submarines of the Whiskey class at a shipyard in Leningrad. U-137 was the last of these. By 1981, the 76-meter-long submarine with a crew up to 60 men was 24 years old. The hull was divided into 7 sections, with torpedo rooms at the front and rear, a total of 6 torpedo tubes. In the middle section was the control room with instruments for diving and surfacing, hydrophones, gyro compasses, and a weapons arsenal. Whiskey-class submarines had both diesel and electric motors and could dive down to 125 meters. Every third day they had to surface to recharge the electric motor batteries. Suka blять. Okay, a quick break here. I just wanted to say in this break that
Сука, блять!
if you liked the video, please subscribe or leave a comment. And let's continue. The first action of the submarine after running aground was to attempt to reverse off, using one and then both propellers for electric propulsion. At 8:35 p.m. they started the diesel engines to charge the batteries for the first time. By 9 p.m. the submarine had established its position and reported back its location, awaiting assistance from the Soviet fleet, as they had not been discovered yet, but the fleet was on its way. At 10 p.m. on the same evening of October 28, 1981, the Blekinge archipelago is enveloped in dense fog. A fisherman by the name Bertil Sturkman is out in his small boat to check the nets he laid out the day before. Through the fog, the fisherman suddenly sees the outlines of an object he has never seen before. He drops the net and approaches closer. Then he sees through the thick fog the submarine grounded on the bottom. Fisherman Storkman sees the outlines of people in the submarine tower, and they see him. A man gestures vigorously with his arms, and Storkman understands that he should probably leave the area. The fisherman turns the boat around and sails back to the dock on Storka. There he tells a colleague what he has seen. The next morning, they together contact the Swedish naval base in Karlskrona and report back what has been observed. To make a very long story short, without boring facts, the whole of Sweden panics and calls in all its military personnel and equipment to the archipelago in Blekinge. People and combat material are flown in as quick as possible. It is quite urgent because the Soviet fleet is on its way to rescue the submarine within 15 minutes. But everything or the Soviets must be stopped at all cost, and the submarine must stay at its place where it went to ground for an investigation. This breach is not taken very lightly by the Swedish army, and the Russians in Moscow, Kremlin are very pissed off. Anyway, it was a constant race against time, but managed to get what was needed to assert authority. The Soviets are now 1,000 meters from the border and would reach it within 3 minutes. The atmosphere in the operation room is icy. The distance shrinks now to 700 meters and the time to 2 minutes. There is no turning back now. And now, with 400 meters left to Swedish territory, the Soviet Admiral Kalinin signals the home base from his destroyer. The Swedes are ready to open fire, and he requests instructions. The response from Moscow is, do nothing. The rescue operation is called off by the Soviet leadership at 2:30 a.m. on October 29. According to the original Soviet plan, the rescue operation would begin at 3 a.m. The Soviet Union was half an hour away from initiating hostilities against Sweden. The Swedish defense had intervened with all its might to stop them. For many years, the Swedes had suspected that Soviet submarines were spying in their country's waters. People began to speculate or wonder if there was a serious booze-up aboard the submarine U-137, which sits there, stranded like a beached whale. We all know Russians like vodka, don't we? The chief of the Maritime Surveillance Center, Lars Hellstedt, and Commander Captain Carl Anderson sails alongside the submarine, and Commander Captain Carl Anderson boards the Russian submarine and climbs up to the tower where 4 Russians are located. One is armed with a Kalashnikov and ready to fire. But then he asks if someone aboard speaks English. He receives no response. He tries in German instead, if anyone speaks English. And it was a language that Staff Chief Avrukshevich speaks a little. Commander Captain Carl Anderson wants to know how the submarine ended up here. The Russians points to a badly damaged antenna and says, "Suka bliat, it's kaputski, it's kaput," which means broken in Russian. The Russians explain that all of their navigation equipment was kaput, and in the afternoon they were to be towed away by Soviet salvage ships on their way. Commander Captain Anderson made it clear that this could not happen. Here, no ships are allowed to come, and there is no permission for Soviet ships to even cross the border. But the Russians had other plans. The Soviet ambassador requested the same evening that 4 Soviet ships be allowed to enter and retrieve the submarine. There was only one answer: Niet. It was bad enough that the crew and the ship were in a Swedish military protected area. Allowing more people in, well, that is just unresponsible, recalls the Prime Minister of Sweden. The government had instructed the Supreme Commander Lennart Ljung to detain the submarine and conduct interrogations with the crew and inspect the submarine. However, it took several days to reach an agreement with the Soviet Union. Since the Russian submarine carried nuclear-armed torpedoes with a destructive power equivalent to the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima, a Swedish attack would be catastrophic for all parties involved. Commander Rolf Edvardsson, head of the Coast Guard in Blekinge, wanted to take close-up pictures and videos of the ship to send back to the National Police Board, but to reassure the Russians and get close to the submarine and film for documentation, a man called Konrad Söderholm came up with the brilliant idea to bring a bunch of porn magazines. He said, "We used to have these magazines, porn magazines. I think the Russians will look at these too, just like us old folks do in the evenings. I think the Russians will find it amusing." So he took his stack of porn magazines and went aboard, and he called down one of the Russians from the tower and said, Come down." Then he came down from the submarine tower, and the vent at the back of the tower showed him the magazines. Then the Russian said, "Ooh." Then he brightened up like a sun.
Magasiner, alltså porrtidningar.
Och det var ju klart att grabbarna tittade på sådana på kvällarna, det gjorde vi gamlingar också, för det var ju roligt. Så vi smidde en plan. Jag sa, jag kan undra om de skulle nog vara intresserade. Så jag tog luntan under armen. Gick ombord på ubåten. Gick emot tornet och här stod mannen som aldrig sov.
Kan man se, sa jag. Kom. Ja, han kom ner. Grina. Så sa vi gå på baksidan på tornet. Så de här soldaterna låg där inne på holmarna. Så vi gick på baksidan på tornet och så tog upp kavajen.
Så visade jag där och blev, han sken som en sol.
And moments later, the Russians also received orders from Moscow to show kindness to the Swedes. So Commander Carl Anderson was invited on board the submarine to lunch, and what is associated with the term Russian tea. It turned out to be 96% alcohol diluted with cherry juice. Commander Carl Anderson, he drank the vodka, and suddenly his tongue went numb and he felt like his lips was fire. And he said, or he thought, "What the hell, you can't drink this." And he put down the glass on the table. But then the Russians got very upset and started yelling at Carl Anderson,
"Suka bliat!"
or something. The last thing you do is to decline vodka if a Russian offers it to you. It is very insulting.
Och som en följd av att besättningen fått order att visa vänlighet mot svenskarna bjuds Carl Andersson på lunch och det man tolkar in i begreppet ryskt te.
Så tog de här glasen och så höjde de dem och så vräkte de ner dem och jag skulle göra likadant. Pang! Det var fruktansvärt starkt. Så det var 70% алкоголь-бейс.
Мы использовали медицинский чистый спирт, разбавили его водичкой, немножко вишневым соком, сделали такой, значит, цветной напиток.
Anyway, let's carry on. According to the political officer on the submarine, Vasilij Besedin, the crew also had their orders in case of a storming. We were to destroy the ship with an explosion along with the entire crew. He had prepared the detonation of the submarine, and he would have given the order himself. But Vasily Besedin would probably also have been the first to fall by a Swedish bullet. And a nuclear explosion in the Blekinge archipelago would have been a catastrophe. That was the last thing the Swedes wanted. Vasily Besedin almost always sat in the submarine tower. His movements were quite slow. They had him in the crosshairs at 80 meters at all time. The Swedes had ordered a sharpshooter called Lage that if Vasily Besedin took any action, Lage should take him out immediately. Vasily was close to death at all time, and he would never have survived long enough to give out any detonation orders, recalled the head of the Ranger unit, Torbjörn Elming. On the third day of the crisis, October 30th, Ambassador Yakovlev arrives at the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs with both a half-hearted apology and a reprimand from Moscow. He does indeed regret what happened, but refers to the fact that the submarine was in distress. He also points out that the submarine and its crew are covered by diplomatic immunity. The vessel ran aground in peacetime and was not on any aggressive mission. Therefore, an interrogation of the submarine captain Gushdijin, as requested by the Swedes, cannot be considered. In this diplomatic deadlock, the highest authorities among the Swedes discuss giving up their demands for the interrogation to take place on Swedish territory, but instead may be on board the submarine. Before they can reach any decision, however, Moscow announces that the captain will be allowed to be interrogated, even on Swedish soil. The reason is that the Soviet Union has been subject to violent international criticism over the past few days, and now wants to put the crisis behind as quickly as possible. The terrified and apathetic captain is eventually interrogated and speaks a lot of lies and nonsense as expected. Eventually, the Swedish investigators give up and the Russians are returned to the submarine. In the meantime, the Swedes have managed to free the submarine. On the morning of November 6th, submarine U-137 is escorted out of Swedish waters, after which it joins the Soviet convoy. In Moscow, the humiliating affair is quickly consigned to oblivion. The drama in 1981 is the most serious violation of Sweden during the entire Cold War. It shook the nation for 10 days. Even today, there is discussion in Karlskrona about whether submarine U-137 deliberately intruded into Swedish territory, or if it was a navigation error, as claimed by the Soviet Union and Russia. There we have it, the story, the true story, the unforgettable event that shook Sweden in 1981. But I've only scratched the surface. But if you would like to delve into interviews, documents, war material, or what some certain soldier ate for lunch, feel free to do so. But anyway, I hope you had some good laughs in the video. I certainly did. And if you made it this far into the video, I would like to say thank you, congratulations. Please subscribe if you would like, if you like the video. You don't have to. And maybe give a thumb up if you want. And hopefully I will see you in the next video, and I wish you a great day. Bye.
Сука, блядь!